betrayed and dismissed. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his plan.
Welcome to Whispered Truth, where touching stories come alive. Let's jump into today's story.
The fluorescent lights of the office conference room hum, a discordant soundtrack to the slow-motion implosion of Mark Davis's career. He sat across from Robert Miller, the company president, a man Mark had watched grow from an awkward intern into a slick, soulless executive. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the sprawling suburban office park, a Bayesian glass monument to corporate ambition. Mark's reflection stared back at him from the polished mahogany table, a roadmap of 50 years etched onto a face that was now a mask of bewildered disbelief. He'd seen trends come and go, watched the company evolve from punch cards to cloud computing, his entire life interwoven with the relentless rhythm of this place. Now, after decades of unwavering dedication, of late nights and forgotten birthdays, this was it. Termination. Robert, never one for subtlety, cleared his throat, a dry, perfunctory sound. "Mark," he began, his voice a practiced blend of faux sympathy and bureaucratic coldness, "it's come to our attention that your skill set isn't really aligning with the company's future trajectory." He slid a manila envelope across the table, a death warrant disguised as severance paperwork. The language was dense with legal jargon, but Mark could read between the lines. They didn't want him anymore. He was a relic, a dinosaur in the digital age. He'd been expecting something, of course, he wasn't stupid. The whispers had become a hum lately. But he had imagined a quiet retirement, a gold watch, maybe a small party, not this brutal and sudden ejection. Mark pushed his glasses up his nose, the thin metal frame feeling strangely heavy. He glanced at the envelope, a mixture of anger and weariness churning in his stomach. "Trajectory," he echoed, his voice rough, a rare display of defiance. "Robert, I built half the systems in this building. I know the server rooms better than I know my own house. Trajectory? What kind of corporate doublespeak is that?" Robert offered a thin, insincere smile. "The company is moving in a different direction, Mark. We need fresh perspectives." He tapped the envelope with a manicured fingernail, his eyes darting away. "And well, the board has approved a severance package that we think is fair." He paused, a practiced dramatic beat. "It's a gesture of our appreciation." Mark felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He knew what was coming. He saw the smug look in Robert's eyes. He slowly unfolded the paperwork, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The severance package consisted of a few weeks' pay, a paltry sum after 50 years of service, plus some dental coverage for 3 months, a pat on the head and a boot to the curb. He then opened a smaller envelope. It was attached to the main package. "And what's this?" Mark asked, his voice dangerously low as he took the small white envelope and opened it. Inside was a single coin. A dime. He stared at it, the bright, polished metal gleaming mockingly up at him. He picked it up and turned it over in his fingers, his mind trying to make sense of it all. "Is this some kind of joke, Robert?" Robert's smile widened. "No, Mark, it's your pension, a token to show that you are always a part of the company family." 10 cents? Mark slammed his hand on the table, making the cheap coffee cups jump in their saucers. "You're giving me 10 cents for 50 years. His mind was a storm of betrayal. He had given the best years of his life to this company. Missed his children's school plays, his wife's birthday, countless holidays. He'd poured his soul into this machine, this soulless monolith of glass and steel and spreadsheets, and this was the thanks he got. 10 cents and a condescending smile. He looked at Robert, really looked at him. He saw a man devoid of empathy, a product of a system that valued profit over people. This wasn't about skill sets or trajectory. It was about money and greed. It was about getting rid of the old to make way for the new, regardless of the human cost. It was about disrespect and the blatant discarding of a loyal and devoted employee. His heart hammered in his chest. A red-hot fury, unlike anything he'd ever felt, began to simmer in his soul. He thought about the endless nights he spent in the server room, the times he'd skipped his lunch to fix a crucial problem, all the times he had gone above and beyond for this place. And this is what he got in return. 10 cents. A literal kick in the teeth. This wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the otherwise silent room. He pocketed the dime. "You know what, Robert?" Mark said, his voice dangerously calm. "Keep your paperwork, keep your dental plan, and keep the 10 cents. He then stepped toward the door. "I'll take my memories and a promise." Robert leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "A promise of what, Mark?" Mark stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned and looked directly at Robert, his eyes narrowed, the fire within them burning bright. "A promise that you'll regret this day. You've not seen the last of me." He then left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, almost casual click. But the look in his eyes, that was anything but casual. Mark walked out the conference room and out of his office building. He walked toward his car, his thoughts already turning to his plan. It would be a long one and a complicated one, and he was going to be enjoying it. He turned back to look at the building one last time, one last look at his home for 50 years. His hand clenched into a fist. The parking lot shimmered under the harsh afternoon sun, the heat radiating off the asphalt in dizzying waves. Mark walked to his car, a sensible, slightly dented sedan, a stark contrast to the gleaming SUVs and sports cars favored by the younger executives. As he slid behind the wheel, the air conditioning struggled to push back the oppressive heat. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the chaotic storm of anger and hurt that threatened to engulf him. He needed to think clearly, to plan. Revenge, he knew, wasn't just about letting off steam. It had to be strategic, precise, surgical. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. He thought about the server room, the humming racks of hardware that had been his second home for half a century. He knew those systems intimately, every wire, every circuit board, every line of code. He had designed and built most of them, and their structure was a second language to him. He knew all the weak points, all the vulnerabilities, and all the backdoors. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 4:17 p.m. The office was still buzzing with activity, oblivious to the storm brewing in its midst. He started the car, the engine roaring to life, and put it into reverse. He'd never been one for grand gestures or theatrical displays, but that wasn't what he was planning this time. He needed to hit them where it hurt the most, where their arrogance and hubris made them vulnerable, their reliance on the very systems he'd built. He drove home in a haze of thought, the familiar suburban landscape blurring past his windows. The manicured lawns, the cookie-cutter houses, the meticulously maintained flower beds, it all seemed so sterile and meaningless now. What had he been working for all these years? For that 10-cent piece of trash? He pulled into his driveway, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. His home was small, a modest bungalow, a far cry from the sprawling mansions of the executives he worked for. He entered his house, the familiar scent of old wood and dust filling his nostrils. The silence was deafening. His wife of 40 years, Mary, had passed away 2 years prior, and the house was never the same. The silence pressed in on him, a tangible reminder of his loss and his isolation. His kids had grown up and moved on, and he knew they wouldn't understand his obsession. This time, this battle was his alone. He walked to his home office, a cluttered room filled with old computers and electronics. He sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He hadn't touched this machine in years, but it was the most important computer he had ever owned and still worked like a charm. He powered it up and watched as the old monitor flickered to life. He started to write code, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with a familiar dexterity. He wrote with purpose, with determination, his anger now channeled into a cold, calculating logic. He crafted a piece of software, a digital virus of sorts, designed to burrow deep into the company's systems, to silently corrupt and erase its precious data. He called it the Eraser, a small piece of software that would bring Robert and his fancy company to its knees. He worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and the burning embers of his rage. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through his window, he finished the code. He saved it to a USB drive, a small, innocuous-looking device that contained the power to wreak havoc on a massive scale. He felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had the upper hand. He had spent the best of his life building that system, and now he was going to destroy it with the same passion, and this time he would enjoy every second of it. The next morning, Mark woke up with a sense of purpose. He put on a suit, the suit he thought he would never wear again. He put the USB drive in his pocket and drove back to the office. He walked past the security desk without batting an eye. They all knew him. He walked directly to the server room, the familiar scent of ozone and hot metal washing over him like a wave. He inserted the USB into a network port, his fingers moving quickly and methodically. He uploaded the Eraser and watched as it silently began its work. He detached the USB and put it back in his pocket. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and left the room.
Wait! Sorry to interrupt you, but please subscribe to our channel, Whispered Truth, and reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your subscribe and like helps us a lot, and comment your favorite part. Now let's get back to the story.
He spent the next few hours going through the motions, packing up his personal effects and cleaning his desk. He was calm, almost detached. He watched the chaos ensue as the system crashed, the screens went blank, and the phone began to ring nonstop. He watched the young kids who had replaced him running around like headless chickens, trying to figure out what had happened. Robert stormed out of his office, his face red with fury. It was almost comical. He saw him yell and point. He could feel his anger from where he was. He walked out of the building, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word to anyone. He didn't need to. He knew what he had done. He had unleashed a ghost in the machine, a digital specter that would haunt the company for weeks, months, maybe even longer. He walked to his car and drove away, leaving the chaos behind him. And as he left, he knew his revenge was just getting started. He was going to wait for their desperate plea, to crawl back to him and beg for his help. He was going to enjoy every second of it. The days that followed were a strange mix of quiet anticipation and barely contained satisfaction for Mark. He retreated into his old life. He spent his mornings reading the newspaper, he fixed things around the house, and he spent time working on his garden. The TV was on for background noise. He was waiting for the phone call, and it would come. He knew it would. He even enjoyed a few nights out, something he hadn't done in years. He went to see live music and some movies. He even took a walk in the park. He was a free man now. He wasn't bound by the relentless grind of the corporate world, but the satisfaction of that was becoming old fast. He wasn't quite sure what to do with himself, but he was enjoying the freedom. He kept a watchful eye on the news, monitoring the fallout from the system crash. The reports were vague at first, citing technical difficulties and unforeseen outages, but soon the truth began to leak out. The company's data management system was in complete disarray. Crucial files were corrupted, and entire databases had seemingly vanished into thin air. The reports went into detail about the magnitude of the problem and how it was costing the company tens of thousands of dollars every hour. Mark smiled to himself as he read the articles. He was very aware of the chaos that he had inflicted. The company stock plummeted, board meetings were called, and Robert Miller's reputation took a major hit. The story became a local sensation, with the company name plastered across the headlines of every paper, with the local news doing interviews with the locals. The company became a laughingstock. Mark felt a deep sense of vindication, watching as Robert's carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. He almost felt sorry for Robert, almost. It wasn't long before the phone rang. It was a private number. He answered it quickly, knowing who was on the other end. Mark, it's Robert. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, strained, and desperate. He could feel the pain in his voice. We need to talk. We need your help. Mark paused for a moment, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. He then responded in a calm and matter-of-fact tone. Help with what, Robert? He said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. He was enjoying this. The system, Mark, it's a complete disaster. We've tried everything. Our IT team can't fix the issue, and we are losing money. We can't access anything. We don't know what's going on. We've been trying to restore the data, but it's all gone, all corrupted. Robert pleaded. We can't operate like this. The company is falling apart. We need you, Mark. You're the only one who can fix this. Mark leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. And what makes you think I'd be inclined to help, Robert, considering how you treated me the other day? The way I recall it, you gave me a dime and wished me on my way. Robert's voice turned defensive. That was a mistake, Mark, a misunderstanding. We were under pressure. I'm sure we can come to an agreement. An agreement? Mark repeated, feigning surprise. Well, now, that sounds interesting. Tell me more, Robert. Robert hesitated for a moment. He then continued. We can offer you a consulting fee, a substantial one. Just name your price, Mark. We are desperate. Mark chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. A consulting fee, Robert. You wound me. After 50 years of dedicated service, I thought I was part of the family. You can do much better than that. There was another pause. Mark could hear Robert's labored breathing on the other end of the line. What do you want, Mark? Just tell me. I want $1 million, Mark said, his voice steady and calm. $1 million, and I want it in cash, non-negotiable, untraceable, and ready within the next 24 hours. That is my price for restoring your systems. Robert sputtered. $1 million? Are you insane? That's extortion. It's the market price of my expertise, Mark countered, his voice unwavering. You see, Robert, I know what my worth is, and it's clear you don't. You can keep floundering around with your young hip IT crowd, or you can cough up the money and I'll fix the problem. It's your choice. He then paused for a moment. But if you take too long, the price might go up. I have all the time in the world. Robert was silent for a moment. He was clearly processing this. The shock and the anger must be coursing through his system. He then said with defeat in his voice, Fine, we'll get you the money. When do you need it? Tomorrow at noon, meet me in the old city park, under the old oak tree at the entrance. No cops, no tricks, or you'll never see your precious data again. And remember, Robert, one wrong move and all the company's secrets will be made public. I know everything. He then hung up the phone, a sense of triumph swelling within him. He had them cornered. He was in control. The tables had well and truly turned. He spent the rest of the day preparing, making sure his plans were solid, and he was ready for what would happen tomorrow. The cat and mouse game was just about to begin, but this time, he was the cat. He looked at the sky from his porch. He started to feel an odd sense of calm. He knew that he would win. This was only the beginning, but the hardest part was almost over. Tomorrow was the big day. He was sure they would try something. The following morning dawned with an oppressive humidity that hung heavy in the air, mirroring the tension that coiled in Mark's stomach. He dressed in a plain, unassuming outfit, trying to blend into the background. He needed to be a ghost, a shadow, ready to react to whatever Robert and his team might try. He checked his old backpack, making sure the USB drive containing the system restoration program was secure. He also packed a small, inconspicuous recording device, just in case he needed evidence of their dealings. He wasn't taking any chances. He drove to the old city park, the same park where he used to bring his kids when they were small. It was a place filled with bittersweet memories, now a stage for a high-stakes corporate drama. He parked a block away, avoiding the main entrance, and walked the rest of the way, his senses on high alert. He saw Robert pacing nervously under the old oak tree, accompanied by two men in dark suits, their faces grim and unreadable. They were clearly security, and they looked like they knew what they were doing. This was not a straightforward exchange. Mark knew that he needed to be smart and agile. Mark approached the group, his expression calm and controlled. He made a point of not making eye contact with the two security men. "You have the money?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. Robert, his face pale and drawn, nodded. He gestured to one of the security men who was carrying a large black duffel bag. He placed it on the ground. "It's all there, 1 million in unmarked bills as you requested." Mark didn't move. He circled the bag warily, then looked at the two security guys. "Check the bag," he said. "Don't get too close to it, just take a look. Make sure you're ready. If this goes bad, you'll be the ones dealing with it." The men nodded, they looked at the bag and one looked at the other, before giving a signal to their boss, Robert. They were clearly experienced in these types of situations. Robert looked slightly annoyed, but he nodded to Mark. The exchange was tense, each man trying to size up the other. Mark knew that Robert wouldn't just hand over $1 million without trying something. He didn't become a corporate shark by being nice and trusting. This was no different than any other corporate negotiation, but the stakes were much higher, and the outcome would be devastating if he failed. He knew that Robert wouldn't let him get away that easily. He would try something. Mark was sure of it. Mark finally picked up the duffel bag. He unzipped it slightly and peeked inside. He saw stacks of tightly bound cash, the sight of it strangely surreal. He didn't even register that he was now carrying $1 million. "The USB," Robert demanded, his voice regaining some of its usual arrogance. "Give me the drive." "Not so fast, Robert." Mark retorted. He could see that Robert was itching to take control of the situation again. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "First, I want to know exactly how many copies of the data have been made and where those copies have been stored." Robert hesitated for a moment, a flash of anger in his eyes. He had obviously forgotten the fact that Mark knew everything about the company's system. "There are no copies," Robert said in a flat tone, his voice tight. "The data is only on your system." "Don't lie to me, Robert. You may have lied to everyone else, but you can't lie to me," Mark said, with venom in his tone. "I designed the backup system. I know what you've done." Robert's face fell. He could see that his lies were not working, and that he had underestimated Mark once again. "Fine," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We made a copy to an external hard drive and stored it in the company's vault. What more do you want?" He said this with resignation and defeat. "I want that drive. That drive must be destroyed before I restore the system. Otherwise, this is pointless. You know that all your data is safe. This is the reason you decided to use me to restore it. You knew that no matter what you tried to do, I was the only one that could fix this problem, and I could destroy all of your data if you crossed me." Mark paused. "And one more thing, you, Robert, will have to apologize to me, to my face, for the insult and the disrespect, and you'll have to do it in front of your goons. I want you to be humiliated." Robert's face was now beet red, his hands balled into fists. The two security guys stepped forward slightly, but Robert raised a hand to stop them. He knew he was cornered. He had no other option. He then turned toward Mark. He took a deep breath, and in a voice dripping with resentment, he said, "Mark, I apologize. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I am truly sorry for my actions." He looked away, a picture of utter humiliation. Mark stared at him for a moment, then a small smile played on his lips. "Good, now let's talk about the hard drive." He reached into his backpack and took out the USB. He placed it on the ground near the duffel bag. "The restoration program is on that drive. It will restore your system to exactly how it was before the crash. I'm assuming you know how to use it." Robert nodded. He was clearly eager to get this over with, to wash his hands of this whole mess and put it all behind him. "We can handle the rest. Now, if you wouldn't mind, we are in a hurry." He motioned to one of the security men. The guy picked up the bag, his face expressionless. He then walked toward Mark and picked up the USB. He carefully placed it into a protective case, never making eye contact. Mark then turned to walk away. "One more thing, Robert." He turned back to face them. "There's a backup system in the code as well. If you try to copy the data again, you will have a problem. Make any changes to the system and you might not like the outcome. My advice is to leave it as it is." Mark then turned and walked away, leaving Robert and his goons standing there, a mixture of relief and apprehension on their faces. He walked out of the park, a sense of satisfaction warming his soul. He had won. He had not only gotten his money, but he had humiliated Robert, and he had protected his code. He had taught them a lesson they would not soon forget. Mark drove home, the duffel bag of cash heavy on the passenger seat, but the weight of it felt oddly insignificant compared to the emotional weight he'd been carrying for weeks. He felt a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had righted a wrong. He knew the money was a bonus, but the real victory was in exposing Robert's arrogance and the company's heartlessness. He felt like he had finally got justice for all the hard work and dedication he had given over the past 50 years, and it felt good. He spent the next few days in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of his daily life, the events of the past week, feeling almost like a dream. He deposited the money into a private account, keeping a portion of it in cash for himself. He had no intention of living a lavish life. He had already lived his life. His priority was security and peace of mind. The news cycle moved on quickly, the story of the system crash fading from the headlines. But within the company, the fallout was still very much in progress. Mark kept a close watch through his connections, his old colleagues, his network of friends, people he had kept in contact with over the years. He learned that Robert Miller had been demoted, stripped of his presidential title. The board had lost all faith in his leadership capabilities. He had been forced to step down to a much more diminished role within the company, his reputation tarnished, his career in tatters. And then he got a call. It was Henry Miller, Robert's father, the company's founder. His voice was old, but strong, tinged with an edge of gratitude. He requested a meeting, a formal one, at Mark's convenience. Mark agreed. He was curious about what the old man wanted. He knew he had to be careful, but this time he knew he had the upper hand. He knew he was in a position of power. They met at the same conference room where Mark had been fired, but this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The room felt less sterile, less cold. Henry sat at the head of the table, his posture still straight, his eyes sharp despite his age. Mark sat opposite him, a sense of quiet confidence settling within him. "Mark," Henry began, his voice calm and measured. "I want to thank you for what you have done, for bringing this company back from the brink. We were fools to discard you, to let someone like Robert take over. I knew he was not ready, but I still let it happen. My biggest regret of my life. You taught us all a very valuable lesson." Mark nodded slowly. "It wasn't personal, Henry. It was about respect." "I understand that, Mark. I see that now. I want to offer you something more than an apology or some money. I want to ask you to come back. I want you to help us rebuild this company." Mark paused. He had not expected that. He needed to think for a moment. "Come back?" he finally asked. "After everything that has happened?" "Yes, Mark. We need your experience, your knowledge, your integrity. We need someone like you. Someone with a moral compass who understands what this company was built on and where we want to go." Henry then paused. "I am reinstating myself as president, and I'm asking you to become the executive vice president, to work directly alongside me. We both know that this company is not going anywhere without you." Mark was taken aback by this offer. It was the last thing he had expected. He took a deep breath. "And what about Robert?" he asked, with curiosity in his voice. Henry sighed, a look of disappointment on his face. Robert will no longer be involved in the day-to-day running of the company. He will be given a different position within the company, a very small position. Mark considered the offer, the implications of it. He had never thought he would come back to the company, but now here he was, with the opportunity to shape its future. He looked Henry in the eyes. "I have one condition, Henry. I want complete control over the IT systems. No more shortcuts, no more cutting corners. We need to build a new system, a better system. I want to make this company something special again, and I need complete trust, without question, without any second guessing." Henry nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "You have it, Mark. You have my complete trust. We can work together to build something amazing. This is what I wanted for so long." He then extended his hand to Mark. "So, do you accept?" Mark looked at Henry's outstretched hand. He thought for a moment. He could feel the weight of the decision. This was a whole new chapter in his life, a new challenge, but this time he knew he was ready. He then took Henry's hand and shook it. "I accept," he said, a spark of determination in his eyes. Mark returned to the company not as the dismissed and discarded employee, but as a leader, a respected and valued executive. He worked tirelessly to rebuild the systems, to implement better security protocols, and to foster a culture of respect and integrity. He brought with him his old colleagues, and together they transformed the company into something better, something stronger, something that was more than a soulless machine for profit. Mark had not only redeemed himself, he had redeemed the company. He often thought about Robert, a cautionary tale of ambition and greed. He wasn't interested in Robert's downfall. His focus was on the future, on creating something lasting and meaningful. He had shown the world that even an old man, someone who many considered past his sell-by date, could fight back, and more than that, could win. He still kept the dime, the 10-cent piece that had ignited his revenge, a reminder of the arrogance and disrespect that had nearly brought him down, but also a symbol of his resilience, his strength, and his unwavering resolve. He placed the dime on his desk every morning, a small totem of his past, but a reminder that he was now in control of his future. The company thrived under Mark and Henry's leadership, becoming a beacon of innovation and ethical business practices. Mark didn't seek glory or recognition. He simply wanted to do what was right, to leave a legacy of hard work, dedication, and integrity. And in the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all. He knew he had not only saved the company, but he had saved himself. He had found purpose again, and for that, he was grateful. The end.
Hey, want to listen to another best story? Then click the floating video and subscribe for more.